Jerry Agard for Ezra Levant. This week in Ottawa, there's a gathering known as the Canadian Property Rights Conference, organized by the Institute for Liberal Studies. The executive director of the Institute is Matt Bufton. Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Good to have you. Liberal studies, do you mean in the classical sense?
That's exactly right. We're liberals in the original and true sense of the word, and we believe that both political and economic freedoms are important.
I've lived in two countries. I've lived here in Canada where I was born. I've lived in the United States. I'm back in Canada now. Love my country, but I don't think I have the property rights here that I enjoyed in the United States.
That's largely true. To an extent, American property rights are enshrined in the Constitution, although those are far from perfect themselves. In Canada, we don't have those rights in the Constitution. We do have some rights guaranteed by common law, but it is not a perfect system, and I think would be made a lot better by having those rights enshrined in the Constitution for us.
Well, as we can see here on the screen, we've taken some tries at protecting property rights.
Yeah, exactly. When the Constitution was repatriated in 1982, there was a situation where the politicians were a little bit afraid that if they gave the right of property to citizens, it could infringe on them doing the things they want to be able to do. So those rights were intentionally excluded from our Constitution.
I have had people call me, Matt, on my talk radio show and say to me, perhaps what you don't understand, Jerry, when I talk about, my rights as a homeowner, etc., is that you actually don't own the property. The government owns it, and they're just letting you live there.
That's, I think, probably a little bit going too far as a mischaracterization. You do own the property, and if anyone comes to, especially the government, comes to take it away, you will almost certainly be compensated for that. The issue, and this is one of the things that we'll be talking about this weekend at the conference, is that the government can change what you're allowed to do with your property. So, for example, if you own some farmland and you were hoping to develop it commercially or residentially, and that could be quite valuable, the government would come along and say, no, we're going to protect this land because it's environmentally significant or for whatever reason, and drastically decrease the value of your land, and you have no right to get any compensation for that.
Well, one of the sort of sensible ways that government will take land is it's become necessary to build a highway through this area. We need the land in order to build the highway for the greater good, so to speak. We give fair compensation, and I've talked with people who've lost their land under that circumstance, and they were okay with it. They understood what was going on, and they felt they got fair compensation. In Canada, do we generally handle that sort of thing properly from the perspective of the person whose land is being taken?
We do in cases where the land's being outright taken. That's something that Canada's fairly good at. The problem, as I've said, is when they're not taking the land, but they're taking some of the value of the land. And that's when some people can really suffer.
Well, that's a complaint that a bunch of people have when they have these wind turbines set up nearby their property. They say, what's happened here is the government has stuck up a wind turbine, and now my property, which used to be worth $200,000, is worth $20,000.
Yeah, exactly. You see cases like that. You see in cases with the Greenbelt around Toronto. There's a lot of people who have land, farmers, they say that they're land rich and money poor. A lot of farmers, their sort of retirement plan was that their land was going to be used, sold off as a valuable asset. They've lost a huge chunk of the value of that land, and they have absolutely no legal recourse.
All right. Well, I think economic history and just societal history has taught us that, in fact, property ownership is central to a free society.
Absolutely, Jerry. I mean, if you look at the list of this group called the International Property Rights Group, puts out index. You look at the group of the countries who are at the top of that index. Canada's about number 10, I believe. The U.S. is up there. Most Western European countries are fairly high in terms of property rights. The Scandinavian countries actually do very well on this index. These are all places that you and I would probably not mind living too much. You look at the places at the bottom of the index, and you're looking at places like Venezuela and countries that you really would not want to live in. And it's not just happenstance, the correlation. The places that are good places to live, places where people are free and able to flourish, have strong property rights, and places that don't have strong property rights are not very pleasant places to live oftentimes.
Ludwig von Mises said if history could teach us anything, it would be that private property is inextricably linked with civilization.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right on that. And property rights is not something that we think gets enough conversation in Canada. So that's why we're hosting this conference this weekend to start that discussion. And hopefully we're going to have a lot of people leaving with some new ideas, new awareness about the issue of property rights.
Yeah, yeah, well, a couple of people that some viewers would be very familiar with, John Robson and Brian Lilly, I know are involved in your conference. I'm going to mention another, there's a book that I'm very fond of called The Mystery of Capital, and if I understand the argument correctly there, it is that your capital is really not, for instance, your house, it's the fact that you own it, that you can trade on that ownership, because if you don't have a protected ownership and protected by the government, you've got nothing.
Absolutely right. Fernando de Soto's work on the rule of law, on property ownership, the ability to use the capital that you own to legally secure additional financing, to engage entrepreneurship and take risks and try to better your position in society. That's immensely important. And that's something that until recently, even a lot of free market economists didn't realize that the rule of law is really the most important thing. For a lot of time in the 70s and 80s, the emphasis was on privatization. And now I think in the past couple decades, people have really realized that the foundation is rule of law, the access to capital that you mentioned, and on top of that, privatization is a building block.
All right, if you could change one law in Canada in this regard, what would it be?
It would be to put the right to own private property in our Constitution.
All right, I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Thank you. Coming up, the labor movement is upset over a new bill that could force them to be financially transparent. That's next.